All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you with another virtual event. We only have a couple more left this year, but tonight we're so excited to have Paige Shelton with us here. How are you tonight, Paige?
I am great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks. As we were saying before, it's so great to actually get to meet you even virtually. As you said, we've been following each other and interacting online for years, so it's nice to actually be able to chat face to face.
I feel like I know you. I mean, it's just like familiar John. So it's wonderful to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So to get us started tonight, let me get you introduced. So if you guys are new to Paige, Paige Shelton had a nomadic childhood as her father's job as a football coach took her family to 7 different towns before she was even 12 years old. After college at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, she moved to Salt Lake City. She thought she'd only stay a couple of years, but instead fell in love with the mountains and a great guy who became her husband. After many decades in Utah, she and her family moved to Arizona. She writes the Scottish Bookshop Mystery series, which begins with The Cracked Spine. Her other series include The Farmer's Market, Cooking School, and Dangerous Type Mysteries. Tonight, she's here to chat with us about Cold Wind, which is the newest in the Alaska Wild Mysteries. So can you tell us a little bit about this new series and the new book?
You bet. I would love to. This is the second again in the series. The first one was Thin Ice that published last year. It's not the normal cozy genre that I have written for about 10 years now. It's a little more in the suspense field, a little less attention at taking away language or gruesome scenes, or a little more gore is included. It's about, the main character is Beth Rivers. She is a thriller writer, and she was abducted by a stalker down in her home in St. Louis, Missouri, and held in his van for 3 days. She flung herself out of the van and ended up with a brain surgery to clear a subdural hematoma, and then she escaped the hospital with no real memory of those 3 days, but wanting to hide and get away because her stalker was never caught. So she found on a map in a computer in the hospital, Benedict, Alaska, which is based on the real Gustavus, a little bit, and took off and went there and has been in hiding now for a few months. I think the next book is even, I'm trying to figure out where I am in the series, but it's been a few months, and she's already on her second murder, or at least her second body, and this one's frozen. Found in a shed a little bit down from where she works in her newspaper office.
So one of the things that I thought was really great about the first book in the series, Thin Ice, is I thought that you did a really great job of balancing, like you said, there's a little bit more language, there's a little bit more kind of heightened suspense, and a little bit more, not necessarily gore, but there's the crimes are a little bit more intense than you would see in a cozy mystery. But I thought that you did a really good job in the first one of kind of balancing that, so that way if your readers from your other books came to this one, they wouldn't have been completely thrown in the deep end with this thriller. Can you talk a little bit about the balance of that for the first book?
Sure. Honestly, I didn't even realize I did it until kind of after it was done. I think, a writer is a writer, and they tend to lean toward a certain style anyway. So when I turned it in, and some of the things that were noticed were the smaller town, the amateur sleuth, etc. As some people started calling it a cozy thriller. So I really enjoyed that. And I thought, that is a good segue. That will take my cozy readers, maybe not all the way over into, the serial killer genre, but give them a little bit more, one step at a time. Maybe I'll do the serial killer next.
Yeah, it's, we say with kind of being booksellers and sharing books with people, it's always great if you can find something that's maybe just like that much outside of somebody's comfort zone, where there's still a lot of those parts that they like, but there's maybe like one little thing that's maybe not necessarily what they would usually pick up. And that's always an easy in to be able to kind of expand people's reading horizons and bring them new stuff that they might pick up. So yeah, so it's definitely nice.
I love that. Oh, John, I love that. That's very cool. Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So since this one is, and you definitely in the second one, I think you push it just a little bit more too. I just finished it and absolutely loved it.
Well, thank you.
There are a few more little F-bombs in there than you would expect. They're not like gratuitous and just thrown in there to be in there, but yeah, it's a nice way to kind of ease people into them. So what were some of the challenges of writing kind of a thriller that's a little bit more fast-paced and, like I said, has a little bit more of that kind of heightened suspense versus kind of the smaller town cozy stuff that you had been doing before?
Well, I think right then you said it. It was, heightening the suspense a little bit and making sure, the goal I think for me was to keep the pages turning at a slightly faster pace than cozy. I still like to keep the pages turning with cozy, and I think that's very doable. But I wanted it to be a little scarier reason to turn the pages. So adding that in fact, when I first wrote Thin Ice, I kind of overdid it. And my fabulous editor, I have a different editor now, but Hannah Breton at Minotaur and now Hannah O'Grady, they're both fabulous. But the first Hannah had me dial it back just a skosh, and it made a lot more sense. It kept it, instead of going here, more like here for the suspense level. So it was a challenge. You just, to learn what you can, this doesn't sound exactly right, but to kind of learn what you can get away with so that the readers will not be turned away or turned off. Yeah.
And I imagine it's probably easier to kind of pull back a little bit than it is to like have it turned in and actually have to go in and add more of that.
Oh, excellent point. In fact, I'm in a plot group with a couple of other writers, Jen McKinley and Kate Carlisle, and that's exactly what we talked about when I was working on Thin Ice. They're like, just put it in there and they'll have you dial it back if you want to. And yeah, that's absolutely true. Much easier than to ramp it up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to try this new series?
I think, readers read, writers write, and I read everything, most particularly, mystery, suspense, thriller genre. And I think, so it came to me, and in speaking with my agent, it came to me about something in Alaska, and then we just kind of expanded from there. My son had to have a subdural hematoma removed, actually. And so he had actually had to have brain surgery. So I brought that in, and it all just kind of came together. And I wanted to take it up to a different level, not because I don't love cozies. I love everything about cozies. I just wanted to explore a different genre and push myself farther.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. I love that the main character is a writer herself. So there's a quote that you have in this new book that says, "Writing what you know isn't about specifics. It's about writing scenes that duplicate feelings with the goal of making your readers feel them too."
Yes.
So what was it? So how much of her like kind of day-to-day writing stuff mirrors kind of your writing process and your the way you view writing?
Oh, particularly the days she's putting her writing off to do till later, So I totally understand that. Procrastination is all about being a writer. Procrastination and hurry to meet the deadline. So it's interesting when you're writing a series where the main character is solving the murders and she's a writer, you have to figure out how to fit all of that in. And I found myself saying, I probably ought to have her write a little today, just so she's actually serious about her real job too. But there's procrastination involved, but I've yet to get her into the down and dirty, hurry to meet a deadline thing. Maybe the next book. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's a lot like, like when we talk with authors who have kind of pets in the book, sometimes they're like, oh, wait, it's been a while since the cat showed up. I have to have them come on screen and do something.
Right, exactly. Oh, good point. Yep, just like that. Yep.
And I meant to mention as we got started, and I've mentioned in the comments, but if you guys are watching us on either Facebook or YouTube, if you have questions for Paige, whether they're about this series, about the Cracked Spine books, any of the other ones, please definitely drop those in the comments. We will definitely leave time to get to those. And we'd mentioned in the comments, somebody asked us to repeat the name of the first book. So the first book in this new series is Thin Ice, and it is now available in paperback. And then Cold Wind actually just came out yesterday.
Yes.
So you mentioned as you were kind of thinking of ideas early on for the series that you definitely wanted to do Alaska. So why Alaska? And did you actually get to go visit kind of the wilds of Alaska like we see in the book?
I did, in fact, and it's even wilder than you might expect, even based upon the book. Well, first of all, 30 years ago, dating myself, my husband and I went up to Alaska for our honeymoon. So not the beach honeymoon, but we chose Alaska, and it was really great fun. And my in-laws happened to live up there at the time too, so we actually got to visit with them. But it was fabulous, and it was shocking to me. It is still one of the most, and I'm going to go back then and then I'll go now, but back then it was still one of the most primitive places you might see. And I don't know how else to describe what I experienced was other than primitive. Yes, there's civilization, and yes, there's a city in Anchorage, and we were in Eagle River, but you head out and it's huge mountains, expanses of ocean. We happened to be driving down to go to Homer to do some halibut fishing, which was very fun. But we saw 2 killer whales in a I think it was Turnagain spit or arm or something. I apologize, I don't remember the exact name. But right there, we're driving down the road and we look over and 2 whales. And so we're telling people we saw these whales, and like, no, you didn't. There's no way you did. And it was on the news that night that they were there. So we visited then, and so I've always loved Alaska. But when I decided to set something there, I wanted to do something even more primitive than Anchorage or that particular area, even around Denali. So I thought, okay, well, Glacier Bay National Park. And I looked it up, and Gustavus was the little town that is right there with Glacier Bay National Park. And I started reading books about people in Gustavus and their lives. And I mean, yes, they've got conveniences as far as a little grocery store and et cetera, but it is a rough life, and you have to be a tough person to live up there. So we went up to Juneau, first of all, which was fantastic and an amazing place. It's on an inlet, and you can even take a tram up, and it's just gorgeous. But then we took a ferry out to Gustavus and visited with people out there, and I knew the second we were there off the ferry, I'm like, this is it. This is a place with very little cell phone coverage, very little internet coverage. This is perfect. When satellite internet comes along, it's going to ruin my stories, but I'll figure something out. But anyway, it was just as primitive as can be, and yet the people were extraordinary. And I thought, well, I've got to put this in a book. So I feel honored that I got to visit. In fact, I wanted to visit again this year, but of course, with everything, I didn't get the opportunity. But so it's just a unique place. You can't find anything like it, and it's still part of this country, of course, but it is like another world.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely get the feeling of that in the books, especially like this one when Beth goes out to do something and everybody's like, wait, you went to do this crazy thing and you like didn't tell anybody where you were going, or I think there's one scene where like you mentioned that people always end up coming to the bar every night just so like everybody in this town knows that they're all still alive. Right.
And I think even in the next book, and this isn't really a spoiler, but I made this up. I didn't hear about this termed this way, but I call it the spring walk, that after the hard winter, everybody gets together who survived, and most people survived, and walk around to all the houses to make sure people are still okay, because a lot of people really haven't gotten out of their houses for quite a few months.
Yeah, it seems like it's the kind of the perfect, like you said, without cell phone access and internet access, you don't have to worry about kind of all of the technology. Dealing with stuff like that. I love the cast of characters that you've created around Beth too. The woman that runs the halfway house that she stays in, the sheriff, the librarian who helps her out. So it's really great to see kind of it still have that kind of sense of community, even if it's kind of everybody keeps each other at arm's length because, they've all escaped to this little place in the middle of nowhere for some reason.
They all have secrets, and hopefully the series will go long enough to display all the secrets. Yeah.
So do you know all of the secrets already, or are you discovering them as you're writing the books?
I know Orrin's, the librarian, the Willie Nelson looking librarian. I know his in and out because I wanted to write it in the second book, but it ended up going to the third book. So I know his story, and I know the police chief's story a little bit, and Viola's story a little bit. She and her sister were orphaned and got to Gustavus from Juneau when they were younger. So I know those stories a little bit, but the only one I really know thoroughly is Orrin.
And another interesting another interesting thing about Beth is that when she was younger, she spent a lot of time working with her grandfather in the police department there. I had never heard of experts in crime scene measurement. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not even sure if it is actually, I know it's a skill that crime scene investigators need to have, but this is really odd and very bizarre. But my son can actually see spatially things in a unique way that other people can't really see. It's just a thing that has happened to him. Who knows what it's about? But I just kind of wove that in as being her main specialty. I don't think there's a crime scene investigator out there that does only that, but it's probably a skill some have. Yeah.
And then let me check my notes. So another one of the things that is interesting is kind of like you said, kind of the storyline between Beth and her mom, her father who is potentially out there somewhere. So how, as you're plotting a series, how do you know how much of that stuff you can kind of divvy out per book, so that way you're keeping readers excited to know what's happening, but not frustrated that they're not getting more answers?
Well, frankly, I'm a little bit worried. Maybe sometimes I am frustrating them, but I'm hoping they're enough to want to know the answer later. So it's a fine line. You have to be careful. You want to satisfy the reader. There's no question. But I also want to put a thread of excitement in for a big story arc to give an idea. There's a lot more going on here than meets the eye, and I hope that's what comes across. Yeah.
So as we, I don't know if this is spoilery, you can tell me it's spoilery and we won't. I always tell people if you think the question's a spoiler, it is. So I'm going to break the rule here. But so do you envision the whole series all being set in Alaska, or do you think at some point we might see Beth kind of venture out elsewhere into the world?
Right now, at this moment, I envision it all being in Alaska. Maybe not right there in Benedict, but I do envision it all being in Alaska. In fact, and I'm not sure even if this is a spoiler, but in the third book, her wayward, crazy mother does come to visit her in Alaska. So yeah.
I love her mother's character too. So what inspired her?
Oh boy, she is, my family is from Missouri, and my family is not my most recent generation, but generations before are from the backwoods of Missouri. And there's a rough and tumble life there that went along. I hesitate, but I will go ahead and call them for what some of them were: hillbillies. So I come from the hillbilly clan, and they kind of made their own rules and kind of had their own way of doing things. And she is absolutely inspired by stories my dad told me about his aunts and his grandmothers. And she's almost a carbon copy of some of them.
Wow. I love her relationship with Beth. I love that, like, she calls and Beth is like completely aware of the fact that her mother is just cuckoo. But at the same time, she's like, she's my mother and I love her. So I'm going to try to tame her more crazy instincts where I can, and kind of like hide information to kind of help protect her. But I love that at the same time, she's also just like, she's my mom and this is just the way she is.
That's exactly right. And that again comes from the stories that I heard, when I would talk to my dad, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad, did people really put up with that? And he's like, family. Family's family. Yeah.
So we've been talking about Cold Wind, but then you also had another book in the Cracked Spine series come out a little bit earlier this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that series and a little bit about the Stolen Letter?
Sure, you bet. The Scottish Bookshop Mystery series is set in Edinburgh. It is about a Kansas girl who grew up and never really even went anywhere but Kansas, who got laid off in a museum and needed an adventure. So she found an online ad about this bookshop in Edinburgh, sent an email, and was on the phone with the owner pretty quickly and got the job. And she took off, without much fanfare at all, and is now solving mysteries out of the Cracked Spine, the bookshop, right there in Grass Market, and there is not a cracked spine in the Grass Market. But there is a little bookshop there that I kind of based it upon that. I was fortunate enough to visit there, and that was fun. But with each of those books, I try to bring in some Scottish history, something like, for instance, in The Stolen Letter, it's about Mary, Queen of Scots. And so it's about her life. I thread her life through using someone who claims to be reincarnated. And the next one that will come out next year, Deadly Editions, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde.
Awesome. So do you work on just one book at a time? Like if you're working on one of the bookshop ones, are you working on that, or do you bounce back and forth between it and the thrillers?
I kind of work on one book the goal is to work on one book at a time, but sometimes it really doesn't work out that way, because sometimes you get edits back, and sometimes, you have to do revisions while you're working on your new stuff. So my goal is one book at a time, but unfortunately it doesn't always work that way. And
I imagine it would probably be hard to switch gears between the two, since they're so different from each other. You would think, but it's not. It's not. In fact, the reason I like writing two series so much is because it gives the creative I guess, a chance, because it kind of goes down using one series. You can move to the other and then use it up, and it kind of bounces back and forth. It really kind of helps me to do more than one. Yeah. So Lindsay is watching. Hey, Lindsay. She says the characters are so much fun and thin ice. She loves them all and all of their quirks. Which supporting character has been your favorite to write so far in the series? Oh, well, I just finished the third book, so I'm going to say Mill. That's Beth's mom, because she's just absolutely crazy. Pardon me, that might not be. she's wild. Let's put it that way. She's wild. But I also really enjoy the police chief, Grill. It rhymes a little with Mill. Didn't mean to, but the police chief is the scruffy old guy, and in all honesty, he's kind of based on a little bit on my father-in-law, who passed away a few years ago and who was up in Alaska. So I kind of based him upon that, and I enjoy that. And you guys, as I mentioned, if anybody else has questions, you can definitely pop those in the chat. So when you start a book, are you a plotter or a pantser? I am a total pantster, except I'm trying to be a plotter. So I'm a wannabe plotter. Again, I work with a couple of other author friends, and we try, they try so hard to help me be a plotter. But then when I sit down, and I just take off a whole different direction than what we originally talked about. But I don't know why. It takes me about 50 pages into a book to feel like if the story is going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then it really doesn't even come together until about page 200. And it has, with the 21 books I've done, that has been exactly how it has worked each time. So I wish I could put together a plot. I wish I could see what was happening. I'm so jealous of the people who can do that. I would love to be able to. So if you get 50 or so pages in and you realize that what you're working on isn't working, do you just put that aside and start on something else, or do you kind of sit with it a little bit? Oh, wow. No, I just destroy it and start over again. Wow. I just have to. It can really be on the very wrong track, and I just know I have to try a whole different way. Yeah. So, and you also mentioned kind of as a reader that you kind of read a little bit of everything. So what are some things that you read lately that you've loved? Okay, I'm so bad at titles, but let me think. Let's see. I read, oh gosh, I should have looked up titles before I did. The Cerulean the House of the Cerulean Sea?
Yes.
I love that book so much. I just finished my official top 10 list for 2020, and that has been like my number one since I read it. Like,
really? Okay.
So wonderful. Yeah.
I was so shocked by that book and blown away. I just absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. And then let's see. I don't know if it might have been the year before, but one of my favorite books, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo or something. Yeah. Gosh, I love
Hugo.
I cried when I was done because I missed them all so much. I
Mhm.
loved that book. That was one of my favorite. And let's see, Before We Were Yours, which was absolutely heartbreaking, but I loved it. About the kids uh, who were abused and like stolen from their parents. It was
Oh,
based
is
upon
it
all that.
is it the Lisa Wingate?
Yeah, Lisa Wingate. Thank you. See, I'm so bad at that stuff. It was extraordinary. That was just Kristen Hanna's The Great Alone,
Mhm.
the Alaska story. Absolutely loved it. Just loved every minute of it. But the cerulean, I can't say that word. That's so terrible. That book just caught me so off guard. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I'm like, that's what this is about, really? And I kept reading. It was great. Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
was my it was one of those books that kind of early as the pandemic hit. It had just come out, I think, in like maybe March or April, and that was like the one that I was telling everybody, like, if you just need this like feel good book that you're just gonna like hug to yourself, like it's this book. And I love The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo
Did you?
too, and it's one of those books that when I that Evelyn Hugo was just not a real person, that you couldn't like look up all of these dresses and like watch all of these movies, because it read like she was such a real person.
It did, and it was just so well done. It was
Mhm.
absolutely perfect. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then so when you're working on mysteries, whether it's a thriller or a cozy, are you able to read in the genre, or do you try to read outside of it?
I try to read outside of it quite a bit. Yeah, because you can really accidentally pick up on a voice or something, and then you read your writing later, and you're like, "Wait a minute, that's not me," you know. So I do try to read out of it. So that's probably why the ones we've talked about, or
Mhm.
have been so compelling for me. Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that's also interesting about the Alaska series is, unlike like the Crack Spine, where we definitely have, there's a little bit of a romance, there's a relationship, that there's like no romance happening. I mean, obviously this woman has other things on her minds. So it was interesting as I was reading it and kind of into the second book, and I was like, oh, there's no like tension there between any of the other characters. I thought that was a really interesting, just kind of observation that wasn't there.
Oh, that actually is interesting. And in fact, at first it was there. And then when I was going through revisions, and I won't say with who, but it was there. And then when I was going through revisions, I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, I need to take that out because there are, at this particular time, more important things on her plate. So automatically, I just kind of put it in there. But I did take it out. Who is that fabulous creature behind you? Is that your?
Yep, so that's Calvin. Let me see if he'll come here. Come here.
Hi.
Come here, come here, guy. Oh, my sister.
Oh, oh, looks just like my cat Bounty, who passed a few years ago. Thank you for sharing.
Sure, of course. We'll see if he'll now just sit here and behave in my lap. I did a Zoom call with one of the local libraries this morning, and my other cat, Juliet, decided that she was going to climb in the tree while it was happening. So I was sitting here like in the middle of talking, and the whole tree just like, is it going to fall over, or is it going to be okay? And then she hopped out, and it was fine. But it was definitely
I
a
love it. I
moment.
love it. Thank goodness for kids and pets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned we talked about relationships and kind of, so what kind of research did you do specifically for this one into kind of trapping and the people that just kind of live completely off the grid? Because if you guys are watching, like in this one, like there are people that are wandering around the town that like town people are like, oh, we didn't even know these people have lived here. So what kind of research did you do into that?
Well, I just asked my husband on that one because his parents were up in Alaska, and they are the most outdoorsy family you will ever know. And I am so not. I mean, it was my poor husband. It just the whole camping thing just never quite took with me. But so he knew some of the trapping, and he knew his father actually years and years ago. My father-in-law did trapping. Now, it's not something I could ever even consider doing. I just could never do it. It is a different sort of lifestyle than I would do, but people do it, and it's still a thing.
Another thing that I thought was interesting with this one in terms of policing with the series is that kind of as Grill is out investigating stuff. Early on, he calls Beth in because she might be a fresh set of eyes. But it was a little surprising to me to see just like when he would go off with Donner, they would be like, oh, Viola and Beth just like come along. So is that something that just kind of tends to happen in towns like that, just because there are so few resources to be able to solve crimes?
Well, that's my explanation. But yeah, I think, in fact, there really were no police officers in Gustavus, the town upon which Benedict is based. But what they actually do use park rangers to do their law enforcement if they need them. But there are no policemen per se. So I just kind of stretched everything a little bit to make that work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and with the setting, it makes total sense that he would be like, "Hey, I need a set of eyes on this, and I can't use my cell phone to reach anybody, so you're here, just come along with me."
Yeah, exactly, and that's a nice convenience. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And how about the so they encounter members of one of the indigenous tribes up there? Can you talk a little bit about kind of the inspiration for them and any research that you did about that?
Oh, absolutely. When we were up there visiting, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even know about the Tlingit tribe. I knew nothing about them. And now, of course, I hear reference to the tribes everywhere. I mean, that particular tribe. But before then, I didn't really know. And so when we were up there, I was very surprised to learn that they have villages right there and they live right there. And so it's very contemporary. It's not old timey like you might think. But while we were there, there was also a show, a historical type of presentation more than anything, and it took place in a rebuilt hut. And a member of the tribe came forth and talked about how within the Tlingit tribes there are 4 different tribes, and she talked to us about each one, and she talked to us about their traditions, and then she also talked to us about how they always marry in one of the different tribes. They never marry in their same thing, and I think that's a way to keep the tribes going. And keep all tribes going instead of everybody staying in one tribe. And we even met a woman who had recently married someone from a different Tlingit tribe. So I am honestly afraid I'm going to get something wrong. So I do try to research it as much as I can on that. Mm-hmm. But it is fascinating. And the people were absolutely lovely and beautiful and so welcoming and so kind and so willing to answer any question I had. Nothing was off limits. So it was lucky. It was mostly just luck that we were there at the time of the presentation.
Wow. Yeah, I love that you pull in so many kind of different elements like that. Beth learning how to survive, like in the first book, not having a car that would be, appropriate for her to be able to get around, or, even just making sure that she has like the proper socks and like needing shoes to get around. You kind of definitely kind of throw the reader into her world, and everybody's kind of learning all of this stuff at the same time she's trying to learn and kind of adapt to these new surroundings. Right,
exactly. I can't remember who I was talking to recently, and I apologize, who was talking about how if you're not smart up there, you better be really hardy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that several of the characters, or like in this new book, one of the characters was like, "Oh, I was here for like 2 weeks and I decided it wasn't for me," and everybody's just like, "Yep, that's about as long as it takes. You'll either know if it works for you or it doesn't real quick."
Right, exactly. You might think you want to get away from everything, but when you actually get away from everything, it can be eye-opening. Are you really sure this is what you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, when there's no internet access and there's no, phones, and you have to rely on landlines. I don't know that I would be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and as in the books, the internet access is at the airport and the library. And that was actually true. The airport, when we flew out of this little teeny tiny airport near Gustavus, which, by the way, it was a seaplane and they did a fabulous job, but I was terrified the whole time. We flew back to Juneau from there. But that is where people go for their internet access. That's exactly what they do.
So because of that, because that's like their access in and out, or these small planes, you're almost kind of writing not even kind of just like a locked room mystery, but kind of like a locked room town. Like you have a very small cast of characters. So how do you deal with kind of almost kind of the Cabot Cove syndrome of you only have like so many bodies that are in this town to be able to kill off or be suspects.
Right. Well, I figure that, so many people are kind of there in hiding and they're out in the woods. And so different people are going to appear for different, for each book. Oh, they've been out in the woods. This will be perfect.
Awesome. Yeah. So Missy asks, how long did your in-laws live there?
Oh, 25 years. They lived there from, let's see, 1989 all the way up until they went back to Salt Lake City, which is where they were originally from. And then they both unfortunately passed away by now, but they lived into their late 80s.
So can you, you mentioned that you've just been working on book 3 in the series. So what do you have coming up next? Is it the next Bookshop Mystery?
It is. That'll be in April. That's the Deadly Editions. And then back in next December will be the 3rd book in the Alaskan. I've turned in a title, but I don't know if they'll accept it yet. We'll see. But the title I've turned in keeping with the theme, is Dark Knight. I mean, I know that's Batman and everything, but still, we can work with it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about titles, both with these thrillers and kind of the cozy series. So how do you come up with titles? Is it by committee? Do you have stuff that you take to the publisher and they say yes or no, and suggest something?
Well, usually I have all the wrong titles. There's very few times that I've turned in a book and they've liked the title, and it's usually had to be massaged and manipulated. In fact, the book that's coming out in April, Deadly Editions, I thought I had the perfect title, and it had the word monster in it and everything like that. And they're like, no, no, I don't think so. So it was an email loop. Bless you. It was an email, triangle loop between me, my agent, and my editor, and we finally got to Deadly Editions. But usually, I turn in a title usually with every book, but most of the time they're not accepted. However, Dark Knight for next year, my editor did like it. I haven't heard if the other people like it, so we shall see.
Well, I like it too. So if they want to put their opinion on Dark Knight too. So and I guess then, so now that you've had Thin Ice and Cold Wind, I guess you're kind of now locked into, you'll have to have like 2-word titles for the rest of the series.
It feels like that. It didn't when I turned in Cold Wind, it originally was going to be A Cold Wind, and then my editors the sales department, which the sales department does very much of the deciding, or the marketing department. And they said, oh, no, we're just going to take off A. And then it just kind of clicked. I'm like, oh, OK, we can do that. We can do the 2-word titles. Yeah.
When we were talking with Ellie Alexander and Donna Andrews on Saturday night, Ellie said that like her son and her husband are both like, there are puns in their house all the time. So that definitely helps her come up with titles. And Donna Andrews said, since all of hers have to be some kind of bird related thing, as she gets stuck, she just crowdsources them on Facebook. And like, if somebody helps she just like throws them in throws them in the acknowledgements or as a secondary character in one of the books.
Every time I look at Donna's titles, I'm like, oh, that seems so obvious, but I would never have come up with it. They seem so spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, I joke that kind of the editors for like at Berkeley or Minotaur, they must just have these just like spreadsheets that are just full of puns that they're like, okay, which one's going to work for this book?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they can either work or they really don't. So
yeah. There's that whole wah. Yeah.
So you've done a couple of other series, as we mentioned. So how do you know when it's time for a series to kind of has run its course and to move on with something else?
Well, the first series I did was the Farmers Market series, and it ended up being 6 books. And it was time to end it. It was time for the main character to maybe get married and maybe stop solving mysteries. So that worked out okay. The cooking school books, I honestly am not sure that there might be another one story left in there. I doubt it'll ever get written, but there might be another one story left in there. And then, sometimes the publishers and editors decide for you. So that, that can absolutely be the case. My Dangerous Type mysteries are three books long, and they were a joy to write and very much fun. But those did end at 3.
Yeah. Sorry, Calvin has now decided He's now decided that my notes for questions and all are the thing to chew on.
That's all good. It's all good.
It's so funny. Lately, all of a sudden, they're like, "Oh, the ring light's out, and Zoom stuff is happening. I'm going to come over here and now chew on the cord for the ring light." I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
I love it.
Makes them friskier.
I love it.
Yeah. So you mentioned being in a writers group with Kate Carlisle and Jen McKinley, who we're all big fans of at the store. So do you guys, I mean, probably now you don't get together like physically, but so do you like get together virtually and like workshop ideas off of each other and plot stuff? Like if you get stuck with a plot, do you run it by them to see if they have like a fix for you?
Yes, we have managed to do a couple of Zoom type of meetings, and those are good fixes for now, and they give us a chance to talk about things. But there's nothing like being in person, and we do look forward to that day. Of course, we're going to be safe. But when you're in person, you can share the bags of M&Ms much more easily.
So how has, kind of bouncing off of that, how has the kind of lockdown thing been for you creatively? Have you actually been able to like sit down and get work done, or has it been distracting for you?
I managed to get the work done, but it has been distracting. And my husband works from home too, and we have the one room that's my office. And so originally we set up 2 desks. So when he was home, he could work on the other desk. But now that he's home a lot all the time, and he was working from the other desk, I was like, we need to come up with another plan, something different. Not because he was distracting, but because I could hear his breathing, so maybe that was distracting, but he wasn't doing anything awful, but I could hear his breathing, and it was just time. So poor guy, we have made a little spot in the garage for my husband, and it's working just fine.
It's so funny. Like we like the same books. We're really similar. Sometimes I look at my husband. I'm like, could you breathe a little quieter, please?
Yeah. Exactly.
Since he's a teacher, he had to do. He was doing. Now they're actually back in school. But when he was doing virtual stuff before the summer, we joke that kind of he had his virtual classroom set up downstairs, and I'm actually at home in my corner of the living room. So we each had our own little like Zoom studio, so we could do our virtual stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the only way. Yeah.
And then you've had the experience of having to launch not 1 but 2 books in all of this. How has that been?
Well, it's actually been okay. It hasn't been a huge deal. The Cold Wind was supposed to come out last week, but because of all the craziness and the unpredictability and who knows whatever, they had to push it another week down, which was absolutely fine, and I understand completely. And I've heard of books that are being moved months. And I think that happened a lot in the summer. A lot got moved to the winter and everything. So yeah, you would probably actually know much more about that. But so I'm very grateful because I have in my head April, December, I have that in my head, and I could redirect if I needed to, but I really they're very comfortable spots for me. And I was very glad to keep at least the same months. Yeah. But it hasn't been bad.
There was definitely a period, like you said, kind of over the summer where we just had no idea what was coming out when, just because stuff had been pushed a couple months, or some things that were like events that we had scheduled in over the summer, like those books had been pushed to like February. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of moving stuff around. Well, and it's nice. Like I imagine you wouldn't want to push these Alaska books too far, because they definitely feel like kind of winter books that you would like kind of hunker down and read when it's cold outside.
Right. I had visions of, next June and, a disaster thinker. And I'm like, oh, please no, but it worked out. It worked out.
Yeah. We have our store book group. They have a different theme for every month, and their August theme is always Escape Houston, so cold climates or something. And they only do paperback. So I'm really excited for this August to roll around when they get there, because this will definitely be one that I'll tell them, like, it's set in Alaska. You definitely need to read this one.
You need a sweater, but thank you. Yeah.
Definitely. All right. So last call. If any of you guys have any more questions before we tune out for the evening, now is your time to get them in. I will mention, if you have come in late, we've been chatting with Paige Shelton, whose newest book, Cold Wind, has just come out. It is the second in her. So what is the official title for this series?
Alaska Wild.
Alaska Wild. So it's the second her Alaska Wild series. The first one, Thin Ice, is also available in paperback. We have copies of both of them in the store right now. We are now open again for shopping, so you can come in and browse. We also understand that not everybody is exactly comfortable getting kind of out and into the world at the moment. So, of course, we're still doing curbside pickup. Just give us a shout before you head our way. We're also still reachable online and by phone. So if any of you guys are watching out there and want copies, there are a myriad of ways to be able to pick up books from us. If you are cozy fans, definitely check out our store's YouTube channel because we've got a lot of stuff. One of the fun things about, again, I keep saying that, but it sounds the weirdest thing to say. One of the nice things about the pandemic is that we've been able to visit with authors that might not necessarily have the promotional budget for authors to tour. We've been able to do really fun pairings. We did one with Daryl Wood Gerber and Abby Collette in the spring. We had Jen McKinley and Marty Wingate earlier this week. So it's been really fun to be able to kind of pair people up, or like in this case, be able to chat with people that I've been interacting with online for so long. And Lindsay, I see your comment. I will definitely add a copy of The Cracked Spine to your stack for you. I'll email myself as soon as this is done.
Thank you.
So I think that will wrap us up for this evening, Paige. It was so great to actually get to meet you in person, even if it was through online. Hopefully once the world rights itself again, we can get you to Houston and have a signing at the store.
Oh, I would love to. And I have absolutely loved talking to you, John, and to all your customers. Thank you guys so much for everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. So everybody take care. Happy holidays, and we will see you soon.
Happy holidays.